One bold act of defiance could cost her everything, but walking away was never an option. In a city ruled by shadows, Malia had just slapped the most dangerous man in Seoul, and now, he wants her more than ever. The club lights flickered like restless flames, neon reds and blues painting the walls in chaotic patterns. Music thumped through the polished floors, bass reverberating through the very bones of everyone inside. Malia maneuvered through the crowd with practiced ease, balancing a tray of drinks, her heart hammering from the long hours on her feet. She had learned early in Korea that working in a high-end club meant being invisible, yet indispensable. Patrons wanted their orders, their fantasies, their attention, but never cared about the waiters who fulfilled them. Tonight, she thought, would be just another long, exhausting shift. Until he walked in. She noticed him before anyone else did. Not because of his suit, sharp and tailored to perfection, nor because of the air of danger that clung to him like a second skin. No, she noticed him because the room seemed to shift around him. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Glasses froze in midair. Even the music felt muffled, like it respected his presence. He was the kind of man that commanded attention without trying, the kind people whispered about in corners and hurriedly changed topics around. His face was sharp, symmetrical, almost carved out of stone, yet his dark eyes glinted with something untouchable, something dangerous. Malia's first instinct was to look away, to stay invisible, but duty called. She adjusted the tray in her hands and approached his table. "Good evening, sir." "Your order," she started, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. He raised a hand, cutting her off, and for a moment, she thought he might speak kindly. She could never have been more wrong. The touch came, without warning. A sharp, unwelcome tap on her backside, deliberate, intrusive. Malia's blood ran cold, a mix of shock and fury igniting in her veins. Her first thought was disbelief. His hand. How dare he? She spun around without thinking, palm connecting hard with his cheek in a slap that echoed in the sudden silence. "Don't ever touch me like that," she yelled, her voice trembling between anger and fear. The music didn't stop. The lights didn't change. But every head in the club turned. Patrons froze, glasses paused mid-sip, and a hush settled over the table where he sat, now staring at her with a cold, unreadable expression. Then came the storm, the hotel owner. Malia barely had time to breathe before the man, red-faced and roaring, appeared beside her. "What do you think you're doing?" he shouted, pointing a shaking finger. "You can't strike a guest." Her chest heaved, her fists tightening around the tray. "He touched me, he tried to." "I don't care," the owner barked. "You're fired." Malia's stomach dropped. She felt as though the floor had vanished beneath her. The humiliation, the injustice, the sudden helplessness, it all came crashing down at once. Her eyes darted back to the man she had slapped, the man who had caused this nightmare. He leaned back in his chair with unsettling calmness, a slow, almost lazy smirk playing on his lips. "I want her fired," he said, each word dripping with dangerous authority. The world seemed to tilt. She had only defended herself, only done the right thing. And yet here she was, about to lose everything. Malia snatched her bag and stormed out of the club, every step pounding with frustration, fear, and anger. She didn't look back, she couldn't. But she could feel his gaze, piercing and calculating, following her, weighing her. It was unnerving, chilling, and strangely magnetic. Outside, the cold night hit her like a slap of reality. She paused, leaning against the wall, trying to steady her shaking hands. The streets of Seoul were alive, chaotic, oblivious to the war waging in her heart. How had one moment, the audacity to defend herself, turned into a battle she wasn't prepared for? Her phone buzzed, and instinctively she checked it. A message from her best friend appeared. "How's work? Everything okay?" Malia's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Everything was not okay. She wanted to text back, to explain, but what could she say without sounding foolish? That she had slapped a man whose name she didn't even know, but who clearly had the power to ruin her life in a single word. Her mind raced. Should she try to appeal to the owner? Beg forgiveness? She knew better. That path was dangerous, and desperate people rarely survived encounters with men like him. And yet, She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The way he had looked at her, calculating, amused, almost approving in some twisted way, made her skin crawl. He wasn't just any man. She could feel it. Somewhere beneath that cold exterior was a mind sharper than any knife she'd ever seen, and she had just thrown herself into its crosshairs. That night, Malia lay in her tiny rented apartment, heart still racing, replaying the incident over and over. She tried to convince herself she had acted rightfully, that her anger and defiance were justified. And they were, but justification did not protect her from consequences. Her sleep was broken, fragmented by flashes of his smirk, his eyes, the casual cruelty in his words. "I want her fired." The phrase echoed in her mind like a chant she couldn't escape. Somewhere deep down, a flicker of fear stirred. This man, this mafia king, this shadow that had entered her life, was not someone ordinary. He had power, influence, and an unpredictability that made her stomach twist. And yet there was something else too, a strange, magnetic pull she didn't want to admit. She tried to push it away, focusing on her reality. She needed a job, she needed safety, and she needed to survive. But the streets of Seoul had a way of narrowing paths, of forcing encounters, and somehow she knew this was only the beginning. As dawn crept over the city, Malia forced herself out of bed. She would survive this. She always had. But survival in a city ruled by shadows and power often required compromise, courage, and a willingness to step into the unknown. And for Malia, the unknown had just entered her life, with a smirk, a slap, and eyes that could see everything she tried to hide. The storm had begun, and she was right in the eye of it. The streets of Seoul gleamed wet under the city lights, rain pattering softly against the asphalt. The city never truly slept, and neither did danger, especially for men like him. The mafia king sat in his office, the city sprawling below him like a kingdom built on fear. His tailored suit felt tight in his chest, but it wasn't discomfort that bothered him. It was that one act from earlier, the slap, the fire in her eyes, that refused to leave his mind. He had seen many things in his life, betrayal, violence, lust, power plays, but the defiance of that African girl, the way she had looked him square in the eyes, had sparked something unusual. Irritation, amusement, curiosity, perhaps all at once. Tonight, he wasn't just thinking about her. He needed her, and he hated that he did. A message arrived on his phone, and he read it with a frown. Ambush confirmed. Rival gang is moving against our shipment tonight. Security compromised. Reinforcements needed immediately. He slammed his fist against the desk. Normally, he would handle this himself. Normally, he would call his men and crush anyone who dared cross him. But tonight, the situation was different. The route was too public, too exposed. One wrong move and the entire operation, along with his reputation, could crumble. He needed someone discreet, someone unnoticed, someone unpredictable. Malia. Meanwhile, Malia sat in her small apartment, nursing a cup of bitter coffee. The world felt heavier after the incident at the club. She had tried to find another job, but word traveled fast in certain circles, and no one wanted to hire someone labeled trouble. Her savings were dwindling, her options shrinking. The slap she had delivered in self-defense had painted a target on her back, one she had barely noticed at first. Her phone vibrated. She stared at the screen and nearly dropped it. A message from an unknown number. "Meet me at the Westgate warehouse. Tonight, 9 p.m. Come alone." Her heart skipped. She recognized the tone immediately. It wasn't a friendly tone. It was cold, calculating, dangerous. Her mind raced. Should she ignore it? Run? Call the police? The name behind the message didn't matter. Her gut knew who it was. The man she had slapped. The one who had the power to ruin her life in a single word. Curiosity mixed with dread. Something about this message didn't feel like a trap, and yet, everything about him screamed danger. By 9 p.m., Malia approached the warehouse, the rain now a light drizzle, the streets empty and eerie. She felt every step like a heartbeat, loud and exposed. Her hands shook, not from cold, but from adrenaline and fear. Inside, The warehouse smelled of oil and metal. Shadows stretched across crates, and the faint hum of refrigeration units made the silence almost oppressive. She heard a footstep behind her, slow, deliberate. "You came," a voice said, low and composed, but with an edge that sent a shiver down her spine. She turned. He was leaning against a crate, the same tailored suit from the club, but without the pretense of luxury lights or music to soften him. Here, in the shadows, he was something else entirely. Danger made flesh. "I don't know why I'm here," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You. I need your help," he interrupted sharply, his tone leaving no room for argument. Malia froze. His help? The thought of helping him, the man who had humiliated her, terrified her. I don't. "You have eyes," he said. "You notice things others don't. You move without being seen. You're clever. Tonight, you are the only person who can help me." Her mind screamed at her to run. Her instincts, honed from years of survival, shouted that she should leave immediately. But the situation he described was desperate. If his shipment was intercepted, lives would be lost, and people she didn't even know could be hurt. "I'm not some kind of spy," she protested, her voice trembling. "I'm just a waiter." He stepped closer, and for the first time, she noticed his eyes, dark, intense, and uncomfortably calculating. "You may be a waiter, but tonight, you're more than that. You're the only one who can save me from losing everything. And if you fail," his gaze lingered, promising consequences without finishing the sentence. Malia's heart pounded. Fear and anger collided with a reluctant sense of responsibility. She didn't want to be here. She didn't want to be involved. But something told her that refusing wasn't an option. Reluctantly, she nodded. "Fine, I'll help. But don't think for a second I trust you." He gave a small, almost amused smirk. "Trust is optional. Skill is not." The operation began. Malia followed his instructions meticulously, weaving through shadows, slipping past guards, noticing details only someone unnoticed could. She led him through the alleyways, signaling the right moments to move, the places to avoid. Her pulse raced, not just from fear but from the adrenaline of being inside a world she had only glimpsed from the edges. They moved as a unit, though the tension between them was palpable. Every glance he gave her carried weight, sometimes cold and commanding, sometimes unreadable. She could not forget the slap, the humiliation, the power he wielded so casually. And yet, she couldn't deny his reliance on her was real. At one point, he reached a door, but Malia stopped him. "Not this way," she whispered, pointing to a narrow side exit. "The guards rotate here. You'll be caught." He hesitated, then followed, silently acknowledging her skill. For the first time since their encounter at the club, he showed respect, though it was wrapped in danger and necessity, not kindness. By midnight, the immediate threat was neutralized. The rival gang's ambush had failed, thanks to Malia's guidance and intuition. The Mafia king leaned against the warehouse wall, chest heaving, eyes locked on her. "You did well," he said simply. No smirk, no condescension, just acknowledgement. Malia wiped sweat and rain from her forehead, heart still racing. "I don't want your thanks," she said, voice firm. "And I don't ever want to see you again." He studied her silently, and for a moment, she thought he might leave it there. But then his voice dropped, low and almost curious. "I think we're only getting started." Malia's stomach sank. She had thought this encounter, terrifying, humiliating, and dangerous, was a one-time nightmare. But now, she realized the man she had slapped had drawn her into a world she didn't understand, a world where survival meant aligning with people who could destroy her with a thought. And she had no choice but to stay. The city's skyline glittered with deceptive serenity, but beneath the polished surface, shadows moved, whispered, and struck without warning. Malia walked through the narrow alleys of Seoul with the same wariness she had developed during the previous night's ordeal. Her mind was still reeling from the realization she had just saved the most dangerous man in the city. And now, she was his reluctant ally. She hated it. She hated him. She hated that she had to follow his orders, hated the adrenaline that made her pulse race, hated the way her instincts were on high alert every time he was near. Yet, no matter how much she tried to ignore it, she couldn't deny one thing. He respected her. Or at least he recognized her skill. The operation that night had been a wake-up call. The Mafia King's world was not one she could casually step into. One mistake could mean death, not just for her, but for anyone foolish enough to stand beside her. And that realization made her both terrified and acutely aware of the stakes. He had called her the next morning with a curt message. "Meet me at the old warehouse. I need your help again. Urgent." Malia wanted to refuse. She wanted to disappear into the safety of obscurity. But fear had a strange way of controlling decisions. She realized that refusing might anger him, and men like him did not forgive easily. By dusk, she found herself at the warehouse again, heart hammering like a war drum. She clutched her bag tightly, the weight of her fear making her fingers ache. He was already there, leaning casually against a crate, as if the night's previous chaos had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "You're late," he said without looking at her, voice low and commanding. "Traffic," she muttered, though neither of them needed the excuse. She wasn't here because she wanted to be. She was here because she had no choice. He finally turned his gaze toward her, and for the briefest moment, she caught something almost human in his eyes. But it vanished almost immediately, replaced by the cold, calculating stare she knew all too well. "You were brilliant last night," he said finally, "but this time it's different. This is bigger than an ambush or a shipment. This is life and death. And I need you to follow my lead without hesitation." Malia's stomach twisted. She had been thrust into a world she didn't understand, and now the stakes were higher than ever. "Why me?" she asked, frustration and fear bleeding through her tone. "You're the only one who can do what I need. You notice what others miss. You're unassuming, clever, and fearless in ways most people aren't." Her jaw tightened. Fearless? She felt anything but. But she had learned something about him. Defiance earned a different kind of respect in his world. The mission that night was brutal. Malia shadowed him through dimly lit streets, through abandoned buildings where danger waited in every corner. Rival gangs, corrupt officials, and even hired assassins lurked in places where light barely reached. Every step was calculated. Every movement required silence and precision. Malia directed him through hidden passages, whispered warnings about potential traps, and anticipated enemy movements with near-perfect accuracy. At one point, a gunshot rang out behind them, and she felt the rush of panic claw at her throat. But instead of turning to flee, she acted, yanking him to cover behind a crumbling wall, dragging him low just as bullets shredded the space where they had just stood. He stared at her then, wide-eyed, a rare flicker of shock crossing his otherwise unreadable face. "You saved my life," he said simply, voice tinged with an emotion she couldn't place. "Don't ever sound grateful to me," she snapped, chest heaving. "You don't get to act like this is some kind of game." He smirked, but there was no amusement in it this time. Only acknowledgement. Only understanding that she had just proven herself indispensable and dangerous in ways he hadn't anticipated. Hours passed in tense silence as they navigated traps, ambushes, and unexpected betrayals. Malia's every nerve was on edge. Yet in the midst of terror, something began to shift. The cold, commanding man who had once humiliated her now relied on her. And in that reliance, she saw a side of him few ever did. A man who respected skill, who acknowledged bravery, even if he cloaked it behind intimidation and control. When they finally returned to a safe house, soaked in rain and exhaustion, Malia leaned against a wall, trying to steady her trembling hands. She had survived the night, but the adrenaline lingered like an electric charge under her skin. "You're remarkable," he said softly, though not entirely gentle. His gaze lingered on her in a way that made her pulse race for reasons she didn't want to understand. "I don't need your approval," she said, voice sharp, but her legs betrayed her, trembling slightly beneath her weight. He studied her for a long moment, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I don't give approval. I recognize talent. And you have a rare kind of talent." Malia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. The way he spoke, so deliberate, so intent, it sent a wave of conflicting emotions crashing through her. Fear, anger, and something she didn't want to name. "You're dangerous," she said finally, her words trembling on the edge of defiance and fear. "I am," he replied, almost casually. "And now you're tied to me, whether you like it or not." She wanted to scream, to run, to throw herself into the night and never look back. But deep down, she knew it wasn't possible. She had seen too much. She had acted too decisively. And the man before her, terrifying, relentless, commanding, would not let her go easily. Days turned into nights of planning, shadowed walks, and whispered strategies. Each encounter drew them closer, tension mounting between them in ways neither wanted to acknowledge. Fear and mistrust intermingled with reluctant respect, and in the quiet moments, Malia found herself noticing the cracks in his otherwise impenetrable exterior, the way his jaw tightened when frustrated, the subtle frustration in his eyes when plans failed, the rare moments when he allowed himself a pause. And despite herself, she also noticed the magnetism, the pull that made her heartbeat stutter whenever he was near, the way danger seemed to become intoxicating in his presence. But she reminded herself constantly, he was dangerous. He had tried to ruin her life. He had humiliated her. He was a man who played with people's lives as if they were pieces on a board. She could not let herself fall into the trap of fascination. Not yet, because in his world, fascination could be deadly. The night air was thick with tension, heavy with the smell of rain-soaked asphalt and the faint smoke of distant fires. Seoul's streets were alive, but tonight, every shadow seemed to whisper threats. Malia's heart pounded in her chest like a frantic drumbeat, echoing the fear and uncertainty that had haunted her for days. She gripped her bag tightly, the weight of her choices pressing down like a physical burden. She had no illusions. The Mafia king had drawn her into a world where survival wasn't guaranteed, where a single mistake could mean death. And yet, despite everything, his arrogance, his dangerous presence, the humiliation of their first encounter, she couldn't shake the pull he had over her. He had summoned her to a meeting spot on the outskirts of the city, a dilapidated warehouse by the river. She arrived first, cautious, scanning the shadows for threats. She could feel the anticipation in her veins, a mix of fear and something she refused to name. Moments later, he appeared, emerging from the darkness like a predator from the shadows. His sharp suit now smeared with rain and grime from the night's earlier confrontations, his gaze locked on her with a dangerous intensity. "You came," he said simply, though his tone carried weight, commanding, deliberate, and expectant. "I don't have a choice," Malia replied, keeping her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "You don't exactly make it easy to refuse." He smirked, a brief flash of amusement crossing his otherwise unreadable face. "No, I don't." Tonight was not about games. Intelligence reports had confirmed that a rival gang had located one of his secret operations. They planned to hit it tonight, and failure meant more than lost money. It meant lives, his reputation, and the fragile balance of power he had fought for years to establish. Malia had been instrumental in the last mission, guiding him through the maze of dangers, saving his life more than once. Now, the stakes were higher and the trap was tighter. "You'll guide me," he said, his voice low and firm. "Every step. No mistakes. One wrong move, and..." He let the threat hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. She swallowed hard. "I know." The streets around the warehouse were eerily quiet. Every alley, every doorway seemed like a potential ambush. Malia led him with precision, whispering warnings, pointing out blind spots, navigating them through shadows like a ghost. He followed without question, but every so often, she felt his gaze lingering, not just on her actions, but on her. Observing, calculating, measuring. It unnerved her. She had faced death before, but this was different. The danger was real, yes, but the tension between them was a storm all its own. At one critical moment, they came upon a heavily guarded side entrance. Malia crouched behind a crate, gesturing silently for him to wait. 2 guards on patrol. "Wait for the signal," she whispered. He nodded, watching her with an intensity that made her stomach twist. She felt a strange combination of fear and adrenaline, a thrill that made every nerve in her body sing with awareness. When the guards moved, she led him through the side entrance, their movements synchronized like dancers, silent and precise. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat carried the weight of life and death. Inside, the rival gang's men had already begun their operation. Chaos erupted as the Mafia king moved with lethal precision, neutralizing threats with a terrifying efficiency. Malia's role was critical. She guided him, blocked escape routes, and even distracted a few of the attackers long enough for him to take them down. It was brutal, violent, and terrifying. Yet through it all, Malia noticed something she hadn't expected. The man who had humiliated her, the man who had seemed untouchable and cruel, now looked at her with respect, awe even, as if he were realizing her worth beyond the fear and defiance. "You're incredible," he said during a brief lull, his voice low but audible. "I didn't think anyone could do this, especially not someone like you." Malia's heart raced, not from fear, but from the words themselves. She wanted to tell him to shut up, to stop looking at her like that. But she couldn't. She couldn't deny the truth in them, or the strange heat it stirred inside her. The final confrontation came swiftly. The leader of the rival gang emerged, gun drawn, eyes cold and calculating. Malia froze for a heartbeat, but instinct took over. She whispered directions to the Mafia king, pointing out vulnerabilities, escape routes, and the precise moment to strike. Bullets flew. Shouts echoed. The air was thick with smoke, sweat, and tension. And then, in a heartbeat, it was over. The rival gang was neutralized and the threat extinguished, but not without cost. The Mafia king had a deep gash on his arm, bleeding steadily, and Malia's own shoulder bore a bruise from a narrow escape. He looked at her then, eyes dark, intense, and unguarded in a way she hadn't seen before. "You saved my life," he said simply, voice low and gravelly. She started, but words failed her. How could she explain the storm of emotions inside her? Fear, anger, exhilaration, relief. Something else she couldn't name? He stepped closer, hand brushing against her arm. Not violently, not threateningly, but intentionally. She flinched, the heat of his presence making her pulse race. "You're mine now," he said quietly. Not possessively, not cruelly, but with certainty. Malia's mind screamed at her to pull away, to run, to reclaim control over her life. But her body betrayed her, frozen in the intensity of the moment. "You can leave," he added softly. "If you want. But you won't. Not completely." Her chest heaved. Her mind was a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Fear, anger, respect, curiosity, and something she didn't dare admit aloud. She realized then that she had a choice she had avoided since their first encounter. She could walk away, escape the dangerous, seductive orbit of this man's world, and risk his wrath. Or she could step fully into it, embracing the danger, the tension, the unpredictable life that had become inseparable from him. Malia drew a deep breath, forcing herself to think clearly. She had survived impossible situations before, and she would survive this one too. But survival wasn't enough anymore. She wanted control. She wanted respect. And deep down, she couldn't deny the pull of the man before her. "I'm not afraid of you," she said finally, voice trembling but steady, eyes locked on his. "But I'm not yours. Not completely." He studied her, expression unreadable for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. "Fair enough," he said, voice low. "But know this, life with me is never simple. And once you've stepped into my world, you can't undo it." Malia's heart pounded. She knew he was right. The danger, the tension, the connection, they couldn't be erased. And yet, she felt a strange resolve settle over her. She would face this world on her terms, survive it, and navigate the storm he had pulled her into. Malia had survived. She had won respect. And she had made a choice, to step fully into a world where fear, loyalty, and desire collided in ways she had never imagined. And the man beside her, dangerous, captivating, unpredictable, was no longer just a threat. He was a force she couldn't ignore. The storm had passed, but the fire between them and the world they now shared was far from extinguished. Months had passed since the night Malia had stepped into the Mafia King's world. Life, if it could be called that, had settled into a precarious rhythm, a mix of danger, strategy, and unspoken tension. The city of Seoul thrummed below them, unaware of the battles waged in its shadows, unaware of the woman who had survived and earned a place beside the most feared man in the country.
Malia had changed.
Fear still lingered, but it no longer ruled her. She moved with purpose, with awareness, with the kind of confidence forged only by surviving impossible odds. She had learned the rules of this dangerous world, and she had learned to navigate them without losing herself entirely. The Mafia King, ever enigmatic, had not changed. He remained sharp, commanding, and unpredictable. Yet even he had shifted, slightly, subtly, in ways no one else would notice. Around her, his demeanor softened ever so slightly, a respect that ran deeper than power or fear, a recognition of her skill, her bravery, and perhaps something he had not expected, loyalty born not from obligation, but from choice. One rainy evening, Malia found herself on the rooftop of his office building, the city lights stretching endlessly beneath them. He appeared silently, as he always did, and leaned against the railing, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You've done well," he said quietly, voice carrying the weight of acknowledgement rather than command. Malia smiled faintly. "I've survived. That's what matters." He looked at her then, truly looked, and for the first time since their first violent encounter, she saw something she could almost call vulnerability. "You could have walked away," he murmured, "and yet you stayed." "I didn't stay for you," she said firmly, though a part of her wanted to admit the truth. That part of her had been drawn to him, to the danger, to the unspoken intensity that bound them together. "I stayed because I survived, because I'm capable, because I refuse to be anyone's victim." He nodded, as though respecting every word, and for a long moment, silence stretched between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was charged, electric, the kind of silence that